March 28th, our agency was notified of allegations that one of our officers had solicited sexually suggestive photos from a female who he had issued a citation to in exchange for changing that citation to a warning. Based on this allegation, our Internal Affairs Division was notified and an administrative investigation was initiated. Internal Affairs investigators later identified the officer as Officer Michael Coppock, a 9-year veteran of our department. On April 11th, Mr. Coppock was served with a notice of investigation advising him of the complaint and the ensuing administrative investigation. During the course of that administrative investigation, it was determined the conduct of Mr. Coppock may be criminal in nature, and therefore, on April 17th, our Criminal Investigations Division was notified and a criminal investigation was initiated to run concurrent with the administrative investigation. As these two investigations unfolded, evidence was uncovered substantiating the allegations against Mr. Coppock. Therefore, on May 1st, upon being informed of this evidence, Chief Doherty took the swift and necessary step of requiring Mr. Coppock to surrender his badge and his duty weapon as he was placed on non-enforcement status and reassigned to the station while the investigations continued. On May 17th, after being presented with all the facts from the investigations, Chief Doherty had indefinitely suspended Mr. Coppock from the Baytown Police Department. This is the equivalent of a dismissal from the department. On May 23rd, with our Criminal Investigations Division presented their findings, which included evidence that supporting the allegations against Mr. Coppock to the Harris County District Attorney's Office. Today, those facts were presented to a Harris County grand jury, and as a result of that, Mr. Coppock was indicted for the offense of bribery. The Baytown Police Department takes allegations of wrongdoing or misconduct by our officers very seriously. The trust and confidence of our community is paramount, and as such, we hold our officers to the highest levels of integrity, as well as moral, ethical, and professional standards. Failure to adhere to those standards will not be tolerated and will be dealt with swiftly and in accordance with the law. We ask that the community continue to place its trust and confidence in our organization, as the actions of Mr. Coppock are not reflective of the other men and women of the Baytown Police Department who don the uniform and badge every day, proudly serving with integrity and honor. That is my prepared statement. At this time, I'm going to be able to answer just a few questions as it relates to the investigation.
Is there any indication Coppock has done this in prior cases and that it ever went beyond just soliciting photos?
No, sir, there's not. No. We're definitely looking at those angles to be certain of that, but at this point, we have not uncovered anything of that nature.
And can you talk about the type of evidence that y'all have seized so far?
Again, Sophia, like I mentioned, I'm not going to talk a lot about the evidence that we do or we don't have, other than to say that we uncovered evidence that substantiated what those allegations were. When it comes to matters of evidence in a case, especially a criminal case, that stuff is better to be fleshed out during the trial and not necessarily through the media.
Was this the only victim?
Excuse me?
In this case, was this one victim only?
This is the only victim we have right now. Like I said, we are still exploring whether or not this has happened in the past. We don't have any evidence to indicate that, but we're definitely looking at those angles.
Can you say what kind of evidence you did have? Was it just her statement, or?
No, ma'am, it was not just her statement. I think it's pretty well known that we did execute some search warrants. Beyond that, I'm not going to talk about the details of that evidence again, other than to say that the evidence that we uncovered substantiated those allegations enough to the point that he was indicted today.
Any indication other officers within the department knew this was going on and that this is a systemic problem within Baytown Police?
Again, you know, I've heard that word systemic problem within the Baytown Police through other media sources, I guess. And what I would say to that is no, there's no indication that this is a systemic problem within the Baytown Police Department. And let me add to that by saying this. We hold our officers to a very high standard here at the Baytown Police Department. And it's just that simple. We work off of things like the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, the International Association of Chief of Police Canon of Ethics. And in those ethics, they talk about protecting the innocent. They talk about not tarnishing the badge. They talk about not sullying the reputation of the police service. And we take that very seriously and to heart. And like I mentioned in my statement, when we uncover information that people are not sticking to those ethics and to those standards, they will be dealt with. We're not going to tolerate it. It's just that simple.
Is there any indication superiors knew this was going on, or was he able to unilaterally dismiss tickets himself or change them from citations to warnings?
No, there's no information, no evidence right now that any of the supervisors knew what he was doing or anything of that nature.
Did he admit to these allegations?
Again, I'm not going to get into all the evidence of the case. Like I said, we presented our facts and the information that we uncovered during our investigation to the grand jury today, and they decided to indict him on bribery charges. So again, I know there's an interest in knowing some of the evidence that we have, but I'm just simply not going to be able to discuss it at this time.
And you said he was with the force for about 9 years.
Yes,
What
ma'am.
all did he do? SWAT team, what else?
He was assigned to our patrol division, and he was a member of the Baytown SWAT team.
Can he face any other charges besides bribery?
At this point, no. I mean, again, as we go through the course of this, the proceedings on this, if something else comes to light that indicates other charges are appropriate, then that will be explored by the district attorney's office.
Bribery, a felony charge?
Yes, ma'am, it's a second-degree felony. Anything else?
When was he essentially removed from the force?
He was indefinitely suspended on May 17th.
And are there then procedures to permanently bar him?
Like I mentioned, when we talk about indefinite suspension, that's the equivalent of being terminated, being dismissed from the department. Because we're a civil service organization, there's certain rules that we have to follow to make those decisions final. So that's why it's termed as an indefinite suspension.
And I'm assuming the department's going ahead and taking those steps to permanently terminate him.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As this case goes forward, again, keep in mind we have a criminal aspect to it, and then we have the administrative aspect to it. They both continue forward independent of each other.
You said he was indicted today. He's been taken into custody?
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge. The way that works is once the indictment is passed down, there's a process for getting the actual charges filed and getting it into the system and a warrant becoming active. And again, I can't stress it enough. The Baytown Police Department is a professional organization, and we hold our personnel to a very high standard. And those that do not adhere to those standards will be dealt with swiftly and in accordance with the law. And I really want the public to understand that. So thank you again for your time.
Just quickly, is there anything that the police chief or anybody with the Baytown Police Department has done to apologize or reach out to the person that's on the other end of this treatment?
We have been in contact with the person that's on the other end of this treatment, yes, ma'am.